Calgary is amongst the many teams that find themselves a less attractive destination, but who doesn't love a good change of scenery every now and then?
You're Locked On Flames, your daily podcast on the Calgary Flames. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Locked On Flames. As always, I am your host, Jess Belmosto, and I am joined by my partner in crime, Nick Zararis. Nick, how are you doing today?
We're getting there.
The Flames have not played a game and will not play a game until Saturday. So we have some lots to talk about, actually. But today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off of your first purchase. We are going to dive into more of the summer potential moves because, believe it or not, this team is going to have to field an NHL roster. And, of course, we are going to talk about the unfortunate and early loss of Chris Simon. Make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Flames wherever you get your podcasts and, of course, on YouTube as well. We are here for you Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, your team every day. Someone said that sounded like a threat, and yeah, it does.
It kind of is. I mean, have you watched the Flames in the last week? That kind of is a threat. Like, I understand there are people who are stubborn who are going to say, no, I want to watch every game. You know, that's part of being a fan is no matter how good or how bad they are. But like at a certain point, I'll have it on, but I'm not actually watching. You know, I'll have another game on and I will look over every time I hear the announcers vocal inflection change. At a certain point, this just becomes glorification of anguish. You know, you can only take so much,
and just do something with your Saturday night. That's your homework assignment from us here on Locked On Flames. But let's get started with today's episode. Where do we start?
So the general idea is, being that the Flames are not going to be particularly competitive next year. Like even best case scenario, you know, they're probably fringe playoff team, you know, high 80s in the standings points. And that's if everything goes well. So based on that idea, you got to look at what other teams do in this situation. You know, it's not a direct one-to-one, but the Flames are going to have a lot of cap space, like we talked about on yesterday's show. They're going to have something in the neighborhood, $15 to $18 million to play with, depending on how certain extensions grade out and that type of thing. And if they have to pay any performance bonuses to rookies from this season, next season. But for all intents and purposes, they're going to have a little money to spend. And typically what teams do when they're in this position that the Flames are in, there are two ways to go about this. You can do what the Blackhawks and the Coyotes do, where you launder your cap space and you get more draft picks. You can do what the Anaheim Ducks do, where they put a premium on paying for experience and leadership because they really want to maintain an environment, even though the team isn't particularly good. And then there's kind of the middle ground. You know, the example I would give of what the Flames should be trying to mimic is what Washington did last year and the year before that, where they brought in guys like Sonny Milano, Dylan Strome, Eric Gustafson, you know, guys who have played small roles in other organizations. They're good at one or two things, but they're not particularly well-rounded. And they just kind of need an opportunity. You know, it's really hard when you're one of those RFAs who's 24, 25 and doesn't get a lot of PT. You know, if you're playing third line minutes, 12, 13 minutes a night, and you're a Dylan Strome who hasn't really had an opportunity to show what they're capable of, you generally have to take the prove it contract. And that's kind of where the Flames are at as far as who they could be looking at. Because like we talked about yesterday, you know, Steven Stamkos, Sam Bennett, that tier of player wouldn't make sense because you're not going to be competitive.
That's crazy. Sam Bennett not working out as a Flame. They did so wrong.
Almost like
they hurt him.
That's the nature of the sport. So there's a lot of people that can be brought up that I have written down here. So there's a couple different types. There's the veteran type who, you know, has a lot of miles, but probably has a little bit left to give you. The Adam Henrique type who, if you bring him in on a 1 or 2 year deal and you flip him at this deadline or the next deadline, kind of what a lot of teams have started to do, where they'll sign guys pretty much exclusively with the idea that we're going to trade you at the deadline. So of that tier, Adam Henrique, Tyler Johnson, Tyler Bertuzzi, Jason Zucker, Jakob Silverberg, Mike Hoffman, Anthony Beauvillier, maybe Max Pacioretty, Kasperi Kapanen, Anthony Duclair, Max Domi. There's a lot of guys in that. Thomas Tatar, I would throw in there as well. There's a lot of guys who 1 year, they're useful to have. They're functional hockey players, and you're essentially buying a third or a fourth round pick at the deadline the following spring. That's the reason you bring in.
What about Matt Duchene, or is he? Yeah,
he is an unrestricted free agent, but I don't think he makes sense for the Flames in the way these other guys do, because he's kind of proved he's still effective in a limited role, and I would assume he would prefer to sign with a contending team. So I think that's part of it as well. I mean, especially depending on how things go in Dallas this year. He's played really well in a smaller role. He's got good complementary players to play with where he's not responsible for as much of the load, but it depends. I could see a world where a bad team throws, a 5-year, $7.5, $8 million contract at him off of this one good year, thinking, oh, he can do it again, but being ignorant of, why he was good in Dallas in the first place. But that's the thing with free agency. Teams talk themselves into guys and thinking, all we got to do is give him a bigger role and he can keep it going. That's why a lot of these guys I mentioned, they're small, they're niche, they play on the third or fourth line on some of these teams. But in an ideal world, you bring them in for half the season and then you could trade them at the deadline. Or in the case of some of them, like a Henrique, like a Tyler Johnson, like a Pacioretty, like a Kyle Opozo, a Max Domi, those types of guys, if you keep them the full season, they're not going to be particularly expensive money-wise, and you have money to burn. So if you want to, be a little more competitive and sign these guys to short-term things, that also works.
And I remember earlier this season, when Tatar was traded to Seattle, Flames fans were like, well, if that's all it was going to take, or, that's not as bad as we expected. If something like that comes about, I'm certainly not opposed to it. I think that this team really is they have to work with what they have talent-wise and obviously cap-wise. And like you said, they're not going to be an overly competitive team, if competitive at all. So you have to really manage those expectations because they're going on a cup run.
I imagine they'll probably bring in at least one free agent defenseman as well, just being that right now they have, I think, 3 under contract, including some RFAs, and then depending who makes the team or not. And there's a lot of defensemen. I know there was a lot of talk about maybe Tyson Barrie being one of the stopgaps. He's an unrestricted free agent this summer. God help us, but Tyler Myers fits that bill. Shane Gostisbehere, Matthew Dillon, Matt Dumba, Zadorov is there, Grzelcyk, Edmondson, Brandon Montour, Dylan DeMello, Derek Forbort, Jordan Schultz, Ian Cole, Alexander Carrier, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Colin Miller, Yanni Hakanpää. There's a lot of guys who would make sense, as that 4th or 5th defenseman. They won't be particularly expensive. And like the Coyotes did, you bought yourself a 4th round pick. You signed Matt Dumba for 1 year and you traded him at the deadline and you turned him into a draft pick. So it has it's more than just filling out the roster. It's also getting yourself an asset down the road as well. It's buying a draft pick, basically.
And coming up next, we are going to talk and offer you some more players and offer these players a beautiful change of scenery to the Scotiabank Saddledome in Calgary, Alberta. But before we do that, we are going to take a quick break here, and I am going to talk to you about something that you might find very useful in your life, and that would be eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience is what brings home the winning trophy and also keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Thanks, everyone, for hanging out with us today on Locked On Flames. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you're getting your podcasts and on YouTube as well. The first player, and this might be my biases jumping out, that comes to mind when I think of a change of scenery that is a pending UFA, is Jake DeBrusk.
Yeah.
I mean, there is the fact that he does have the Alberta connection, obviously, born and raised in Edmonton, but I don't particularly think long-term things are going to work out in Boston for him. So,
no, I don't think he makes sense as a UFA. If this were like 2 or 3 years ago and he were still a restricted free agent, then I think it would make a little more sense because you would kind of be able to try it before you buy it. You know, you would have a year or two to try him out, see if he fits what you want to do, if he complements the pieces you have. The reason I phrased it as change of scenery, I wrote down a couple of restricted free agents who their rights expire, so they're still under team control. But these are guys who need to go somewhere else, in my opinion, who, you know, guys like Victor Olofsson, guys like Alex Turcotte, Barrett Hayden, Vasily Podkolzin, Blake Lizotte, Cole Sillinger, Alexander Texier, Yamamoto, who's on Seattle, Tolvanen, who's on Seattle, Zadina, who's on San Jose, Philip Tomasino, who is on Nashville. You know, these are all guys who need to play more. A lot of these guys they haven't had the ice time, or in the case of Olofsson, they haven't looked the same. Like, you know, Olofsson had 40 goals a couple of years ago playing with Jack Eichel the one year everybody was healthy in Buffalo, and he's effectively never been the same player. But you don't score 40 goals on a fluke. You know, you don't go from scoring 40 goals to scoring 12 without something not working. So I think a lot of those types of guys, the restricted free agents who are in need of a change of scenery, I think those are worth conversations. You know, a lot of the Flames core, their next wave of guys, is in their mid-20s. You know, right. It's guys who are 24, 25, 26, 27. So these are guys who probably are going to cost you, you know, mid-round pick, like a third and a fifth for some of these guys, if we're going on like a generous grading of what assets cost. But that's the kind of thinking you need when you're in this transitionary period where if somebody's not happy with their situation and you have the assets, make it happen.
Yeah. And I think Cole Sillinger would be a great pick for Calgary for many reasons, but mainly because I had him, I took him in the Locked On NHL Network mock draft when he was selected by Columbus instead. So it'd be nice to see the prophecy come true. And we know he has some Calgary connections as well. So, I mean, it would be nice to see just really anything. I think you really can't.
Oh, I've got more.
Oh, go on.
I've got more.
Let's hear it.
Yeah, well, on defense, if you are interested in adding one to the three you think you have, and I'm including Chillington in that three, you know, Ryan Lindgren is a restricted free agent, Henry Jokicaru of the Sabres, Eric Branstrom of the Senators, Nils Lundqvist of the Stars, and Ville Heinola of the Jets. You know, those are all restricted free agents of varying age. Lindgren's the oldest. I probably wouldn't target him, being that he's a little bit older than the other ones and he's kind of a little more, he is what he is at this point, whereas the other guys, they kind of just need to play. You know, Nils Lundqvist still less than 100 NHL games. I'm pretty sure Ville Heinola is still less than 100 career NHL games, and they're getting, I don't want to say getting up there about guys who are, you know, 23, 24 years old. But yeah, Ville Heinola has 35 games. He needs to play. At 23 years old, to only have 35 games played as a first-round pick, that means the organization didn't have a spot for him, and he's been kind of pigeonholed. He's been stuck in a certain spot. And that's the idea of going after restricted free agents, is They're cost controlled. And generally speaking, the ones I've mentioned here, they're all relatively high draft picks where something in their development process didn't work out, whether it was their talent not translating, the opportunity, like where they're playing in the lineup, or maybe the system the team plays doesn't work for them. This is where you can get creative and you can really kind of flex your chops as an organization. Because if you have good pro personnel departments, you can turn these guys into things. Like I said, Olsen scored 40 goals a couple of years ago. You drop, and he's not going to cost a lot because he hasn't played well in a couple seasons. I want to say he scored as many goals in the last 2 years as he did the 40 goal season. Yeah. A couple years ago, he had 28 goals and he had 40 points. Yeah. So in my mind, this is where the Flames have an opportunity. These are all guys who need changes of scenery. They are inexpensive. You have lineup spots. You have nothing to lose. Mm-hmm. Worst case, you burned a third round pick on a guy who already had 40, 50 NHL games. That's a lot better than what you're going to take in the third round this summer. Right. The guy you take in the third round of this draft, he's not going to play for at least 2 or 3 years. And that's if everything goes well.
Exactly. And I think, this is the opportunity, like it is presenting itself. And this is a pretty good free agency class, I would say, UFAs and RFAs, because the last few years have not been as
juicy.
Yeah, like there hasn't been much. You got, Tyler Bertuzzi last summer, but that was really it. If I'm even remembering correctly, but it's
hard. Yeah. Good players don't get there.
Exactly. And we talk about that all the time. So I don't know. I feel like it would be silly not to try to throw something at some of these RFAs and really, evaluate where you're at, especially, once the Wranglers season is finished, who is ready to graduate? Who do you see possibly filling out that NHL roster and plug and play, figure something out?
I don't think it's a good assumption, and I generally try not to, no matter what team I never assume a guy who finishes a season in the AHL is just guaranteed going to make the NHL roster the next year. That's something you should keep in mind. Like, no matter how good they play, no matter how strong they look, never assume a guy who finished the season the year before in the AHL is going to start the following season in the NHL. Teams love to slow play this, give them 10, 15 games in the AHL before calling them up. So it behooves you to bring guys in just to see. None of these guys is going to be particularly expensive. And when you're in this exploratory period as an organization, you can try things out. And the worst thing is you got more information. It didn't work. Okay. Well, now that we know that didn't work, we have more information and we can try and target different types of players because this skill set did not translate to what we were looking for.
Yeah. And, I think about 2 years ago when they brought in Sonny Milano on a PTO, and that didn't end up working out for whatever the reason, but it's a low risk, high reward sort of situation. You're not going to just magically find good players. They're not just going to sprout overnight in your organization. So, let's try a different path. It's all good.
Targeting restricted free agents is one of the underdeveloped markets in hockey. I know nobody wants to give offer sheets because they're all scared about hurting each other's feelings. Okay, trade a 4th round pick for one of these guys. Turn a 3rd round pick into Cole Sillinger. Turn a 2nd round pick into Cole Sillinger. Drop him into your top 6, and maybe he's your next year Sharon Govich and scores 25 goals because he's getting consistent minutes on the team that wants him to succeed as opposed to whatever's going on in Columbus.
We need more fan bases that hate each other solely because of offer sheets, the way that Carolina and Montreal hate each other. That is a crazy thing almost 5 years later. But anything else before we wrap up today's show?
There's two more. I didn't mention them because they're probably going to stay with their teams. But Marty Necas, if you really want to be risky in Carolina, who hasn't really put together any counting stats, but the tools are there. And then Kaapo Kakko with the Rangers, same boat. Doesn't have the counting stats, but that's a team that's probably going to be up against the ceiling and might try and turn him into assets. So, it's just a thought. The worst thing you could do, have some thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, just because you think them doesn't mean it's going to happen. So
exactly.
Coming up next, we will wrap up today's show remembering Chris Simon, and we'll be right back after this. You should not have to worry about where you are buying your tickets for your next big event. I love using Game Time because you do get that all-in pricing, the view from your seats, and flash deals. See the view from your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event, and even an hour after it starts. It is the place to find last-minute seats. Nick, are you planning on going to anything in the coming months?
We're going to Fall Out Boy on Friday, actually.
Well, that will be so much fun. If you are in the area of tour dates, check Game Time because you never know what you might find. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thanks everyone for hanging out with us today on Locked On Flames. Make sure you're following us on Twitter at Just Belmosto and at Nick Zeraris. We have unfortunately seen an uptick in young-ish, I would say very young, players passing away.
Yeah, it is. This is one of those unfortunate byproducts. I mean, his family says they assume this was CTE related, that he took his own life. They assume that he was acting the way he was because he was suffering from CTE. And I say this every time we talk about this subject. We exist in a world where Gary Bettman goes before Canadian Parliament and says there's no correlation between concussions and CTE. At some point, you gotta take a step back, and everybody's gotta. And this is why when we talk about fighting and we talk about hitting in the sport, you lose half the audience right away when you start bringing that up because they start saying, "Well, then it's not hockey anymore." Well, if this is what hockey's doing to people, at a certain point, you gotta accept that this is entertainment. The rules are what they are because they're made up. They're not divine. We can change the rules at any point. There used to not be there used to be a 2-line pass in hockey. There used to not be a trapezoid behind the net. The rules are whatever we want them to be. Mm-hmm. The whole point of having a governing body to make the game better is to improve the quality for everybody. And yes, you will lose a segment of your hardcore audience if you ban fighting or if you make all head contact a penalty. But is losing a segment of your audience worse than losing people's lives? I mean, it sounds crazy when you lay it out like that, but there are people who will voraciously argue online, well, no, then it's not hockey. Well, I'm not watching anymore if there's not fighting, if there's not hitting.
Then go watch boxing.
There are combat sports, which are also terrible, but at least it's the same. You are getting what you crave. Hockey can be so much more than it presently is, but it is so stubbornly clung to what it was. And in trying to satiate a segment of the audience and the ownership that very clearly likes this, it tells you the priorities. They don't care. They don't care. We talk about it all the time. If the owners don't like something, they will change the rules. It's that simple.
And I think, if you look at it like this, I think that this will really hopefully open people's eyes. In 15 to 20 years from now, you turn on the news or whatever however we're consuming media, and you see that Ryan Reeves, first player, he's dead. And we're having the same conversation.
Derek Bugard was 10 years ago. I mean, we're really not that far removed. We are not that far removed. And it is beyond frustrating to know that we know better and nobody does anything about it. You lose people when you start talking about it from a morality perspective, but at a certain point, after reading Boy on Ice, I wince now anytime I see a fight, because I'm thinking you're getting punched in the head purely for entertainment purposes, purely to feel something. There are so many. It is so unbelievably frustrating that we are still having these conversations 10 years after the fact. Chris Simon played 15 years in the league, almost 1,000 career games, almost 2,000 penalty minutes. And that's the poster boy for what hockey is, the physically imposing guy who can score a timely goal when you need him to, who'd go to war for any one of his teammates. And it sounds ridiculous to say, but gave his life in the pursuit of trying to do something in hockey. And we can do better. It's so maddening to keep having the same conversation over and over again.
Mm-hmm. And I think about the timing of Bill Daly's comments today about how he said, there's no correlation. There are things that I would like to say about that, but I cannot. I would
Family show.
But I think about the NFL and how many players have done similar things because of the head trauma, and how Junior Seau did not, he purposely avoided head injury so his brain could be studied after his death. Like, that's when you kind of, you have to be so self-aware to know that your brain is going to be studied because of how many hits you took in the game you played, and you make sure that that's not taken away, that there is an advancement for science.
The only way I think hockey has the moral awakening that it needs to have is if they're able to diagnose it when people are still alive. Yeah. I think that's genuinely the only way you're going to get people to care, because too many people don't. They view it as, he played, he got paid a lot of money, his family still has the money. And there are people who are online right now in the replies of tweets arguing under a death announcement about, he made a lot of money. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter.
No. And we have seen a lot of young players, I feel like in the last year and a half, have to retire from, junior or college hockey because their doctors are telling them, hey, if you continue down this path, you might start developing early onset Alzheimer's at 23 years old. If a doctor told me that, I wouldn't even know what to do. I would rethink every single life decision and really wonder if it's even close to worth it anymore. I don't care about a paycheck at that point.
You can't buy another life. It sounds like a lot of this conversation sounds very straightforward and very simple. It doesn't matter how much money you have. When you're dead, you're dead. And we know that playing hockey a certain way is leading to people dying prematurely, whether it be through, I'm trying to think I had a phrase, not natural, but, like early onset Alzheimer's, that type of thing. This is a risky lifestyle. There's a reason we know this stuff, and nothing changes. It sucks.
It does. And I mean, hopefully we see a change in our lifetime, because otherwise there's not going to be any NHL. No one's going to want to put their kid through that. The same way that we've seen an uptick in parents not letting their kids play football.
Yeah.
So definitely a lot to think about, a lot to digest. But make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Flames wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for joining us. You can find us on YouTube as well. We are here for you Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, your team every day. Nick, do you have any final words for us today?
Take care of your brains, people.